Welcome to the Rebuilt Parish podcast, where we equip pastors, parish leaders, and anyone who just loves their parish. We share tried and true, universally implementable strategies to help your parish reach the lost, encourage parishioners to grow deeper in their faith, deliver an excellent weekend experience, and grow layers of leaders. We'll help you rebuild your local Catholic Church. This is the Rebuilt Parish podcast. Today on the podcast, we're wrapping up our discussion on the weekend experience with a tactical episode for you. We're going to walk through how to do a weekend experience self-evaluation. Well, you may be asking, what is a weekend experience self-evaluation? This is an evaluation that we put together for you and your team to walk through either together or separately. Write down your results. We have a space for you to write down your results here. And then come together in a meeting afterwards to discuss your findings and put together an action plan on what you can do to make your overall weekend experience better. You also might be asking, why is this important? Well, this is going to help you make your parish more welcoming to outsiders and help make it a place where your insiders can feel like they can grow in their faith and have a great worship experience. In this self-evaluation, we cover all aspects of the weekend experience and even include some other just parts of the weekend experience, like what the inside and outside of the building looks like. We'll talk about hospitality and ask you about your music and your kids programs. We'll also evaluate the message, communication, preparation, and the online campus. So if you'd like a copy of this, you can go to the link that's in our show notes and print this out for free. Or you can also go to rebuiltparish.com/weekend evaluation and download it there. All of the questions we're going to talk about today, they're right here in this evaluation for you. Well, let's get it started by talking about what a newcomer or an outsider might see the first time they show up on your campus. So here are some questions to think about. What is the experience approaching your church? What is the parking situation? Is it clear? Do people know where to park and which door to go in? Is the signage clear and helpful? How accessible is the church for people with disabilities? So some things that you may want to consider here are, if the parking lot isn't clear, what can you do? Does it need to be cleaned up? Do you need to improve upon those signing? If so, do it. One recommendation that we have is to have parking lot ministers. And these parking lot ministers can help people park. But what's great, not just great about that they'll help people park, but they will also just give that first line of welcome to somebody who's coming, who's brand new. And this makes such a great impression. When we talk about, is it accessible? If it's not, what can you do to improve that? And who do you need to talk to for either grant money or working with your buildings and grounds team to just clear any obstacles? Now, let's say we go inside the doors of your parish and we look at the physical setting. Are your spaces clean and free of clutter? And how well can people see and hear within the church? So going to that, are your spaces clean and free of clutter? I can tell you, I've walked into some parishes who have a beautiful, clean vestibule. Everything is well signed. There's not any clutter. And then I walked into some parishes where, wow, there is just stuff everywhere. There's books and pamphlets and signage and things written in crayon. I mean, we want to make sure you're giving a clean experience for people so that they feel welcome and they don't feel confused. Because let's remember, when you come into a messy situation, that can confuse your mind. And that's not a place where anybody wants to be walking into a church. When we talk about how well people can see and hear within the church, let's really talk about that sound system. My parish had a sound system that was not good. I mean, I can tell you So many times we couldn't hear sitting in our favorite spot. It would crackle, the microphones would squeal. It was rough. When COVID happened, we thankfully had an organization that offered to pay for a new sound system for us. And once that happened, so much changed for us within the weekend experience because people could actually hear what was going on. And it was incredible for people who came back after the shutdown when they were like, wow, we can actually hear. So let's just remove all barriers and obstacles that we can to make that Mass experience great. Now, the next part that we're going to evaluate is our staff and volunteer ministers. Here's a question for you. Which staff and volunteer ministers work the weekends and what are they doing? How well are they performing their duties and what training do they receive? And what accountability measures are in place? So if your parish is anything like a typical parish, you may not have too many staff members working on the weekend. But let's think about it. The weekend is when we do business. This is when our newcomers come, and this is when most of our parishioners end up coming. They're not all coming on campus to the office to talk about office business during the week. You'll get some of those, but a lot of what we do is on the weekend. So this is where it's so important to have some key staff members there on the weekend, and not just key staff members, but some volunteer leaders as well. So here are some positions you may want to think about. In the past, maybe it was just your music director and maybe someone who leads your next gen, but you're also going to want the rest of your leadership team there to help answer questions, to help. A lot of time we have some just random stuff happens on the weekends too, like lighting issues or heat issues, or if you're in a place where it's cold, there's ice. And so you want to make sure that you've got volunteers and staff members who are on site to help. One way to do this is by having a welcome desk. And this is where a lot of that parish business can take place. And I can tell you that people appreciate being able to come and to ask their questions there. They can register for the parish there. They can do any sort of parish business at the welcome desk. And then that also frees up the office a little bit during the week as well. And that's a role that you can have a volunteer help out with. And it's so important also to make sure that when you have these volunteers in place, that you're training them as well. And if you didn't catch our episode where Joseph talks all about how he trains the volunteer ministers at Church of the Nativity, I highly recommend listening to that one. The next question we're going to talk about is, what is your experience like for children and parents? And this is one that hits home for me. I started getting involved in my parish when I had little kids. So here are my questions for you. What is the experience for children on the weekend at your parish? And what is the experience for parents with small children? So let's talk about, what are you doing for your children at Mass? Do you have children's liturgy of the word? If so, what do the spaces look like? What is the experience like? Are you having a ton of kids come up, or is it maybe just a couple? Are you having them coming out with big smiles on their faces, showing their parents what they've done? When, Tom has talked about this before in a podcast episode, and he said that when you do something for my kid, you do something for me. And that resonates too. When parents don't have to drag their kids to Mass, but when it's the kids in turn dragging their parents to Mass, that's the type of experience you want. You want those kids to have great and engaging programs. Do you also have volunteer opportunities for those older kids on the weekends? What do you have for your next gen programming? This is all so key to that weekend experience. And then what are you doing for those little kids? Is there a nursery in your parish? Are you giving your parents a space where they can take a child that maybe didn't want to go to the nursery, or maybe you don't have a nursery, but is there a space where they feel like they can take their child where they're not going to be disrupting the rest of Mass? This is key, especially because if we want to engage the next generation and continue growing our parish, we need to be a welcoming place for families with young children. The next part we're going to talk about is preaching. And we're going to talk about the message here. How is the preaching? Are parishioners engaged and discussing the homily after Mass? I can tell when people love the homily because that's when the line is super long to shake Father's hand at the end of Mass. And I love overhearing people say, "Great homily today. That was so good." But then I'm sure you've also maybe experienced a homily that wasn't so great. Or maybe you could tell that the priest didn't quite prepare for it. Or maybe you just weren't sure where he was going with it. And so this is where we want to make sure we're having that preaching in a message series. And if you need some help with that, that's something that we can help with. But we want to make sure that you're not putting people to sleep in the pews, that they're engaged and listening, and that you're helping to fill them up before sending them out to make disciples for the rest of the week. The next part of the weekend experience we're going to evaluate together is the music and that engagement within it. So take a listen at Mass. How is your music? And then look around. Are people singing? So really ask yourself this. And when you look and you see the people really singing and engaging, that's when you know you've got a great music program. When they're not particularly singing along, that's when you may think, okay, what could we do a little bit differently here? We know that music is the water on which the rest of the Mass sails. And we want to make sure that we are providing just an excellent music program that is really worthy of God's worship. This next part we're going to talk about is hospitality and fellowship. Here's a question to ask you. How is your hospitality? Do you have greeters and host ministers and parking lot ministers? And then is there any form of fellowship on your weekend experience? So this hospitality and fellowship piece here, this is all about how are you making people feel when they come to Mass and as they're leaving Mass and that whole time that they're there. So do you have those greeters and host ministers? So we already talked about how great it is to have that parking lot minister that's welcoming people, helping them park, because we know that parking can be a frustration for them. But also, it just provides an excellent level of service when you have someone standing at the front door, greeting them with a smile, a hello, a good morning. Oh, wow, I like your dress. Oh my goodness, it's so good to see you. Or welcome back. It's nice to have you here. This goes so far, whether you're a newcomer or you're someone who's been going to the parish for years, that personal connection. So if you've got a parking lot team and you've got a greeting team, each person that comes to Mass is already being greeted at least twice. But let's talk about taking it to that next level. If you've got a host minister who, when people come in after they've gotten through the front door, that host minister helps them find their seat. When you take it just that far, that is embracing someone and helping them feel so welcome. Have you ever looked around and you could tell when somebody was new, like they really weren't sure where to sit? Well, we can do them a disservice by just letting them flounder, or we can have that host minister in place and help them find a seat. So again, that just takes some of that uncomfortableness of coming to Mass out of the way. When we talk about our fellowship, that's what are we providing after Mass? What are we doing to help keep people engaged? How are we encouraging them to make relationships and forge friendships and stick around and talk after Mass? So this can be anything like a coffee hour or having a cafe. And this can be simple and start out. I can tell you when we started this at our parish, it was very simple. It was a couple of folding tables, me brewing the coffee and picking up Dunkin' Donuts, to now what it's turned into is we have volunteers that take on coffee hour, and each volunteer ministry or also our school sponsors these. They provide the refreshments and they provide the hospitality for it. They serve it. And this is just such a great way for not only your parish to get to know the different ministries, organizations, and even the students, but then it's also a great way to help continue those conversations and let people have that time to build those relationships. Moving on to the next section in the evaluation, we're talking about preparation and evaluation. Well, we know the weekend comes every week. What are we doing to prepare for it? What evaluation is made about the experience each weekend? So first, let's talk about that preparation piece. What is your parish doing every week to prepare for the weekend? Are you ensuring you've got all of your volunteer ministers in place? Are you practicing the homily? Is the choir or music team practicing so that they can perform with excellence? What are you doing to prepare for that? And then what about an evaluation? What's happening afterwards? Are you having any sort of meeting on Monday to talk about how the weekend went, to celebrate the wins and what went well, and to see who needs to be followed up with based on things that happened at the welcome desk? And to talk about, what maybe didn't go as well that we could improve upon for next week? Planning and evaluating can just help with continuous improvement in the weekend experience. I'd really love to talk about this online campus experience, and some of you may not have an online campus yet, and that's okay, or you could even just be getting started. But let's ask, how is your online campus? What's the experience for someone attending virtually? Now, I've seen online campuses that have been very simple, where it is just one camera live streaming Mass the whole time. And then I've seen some great live stream services where it's multiple cameras, from people holding cameras to cameras mounted and zoomed, and I've seen them in between. And I can tell you, there are some things that really make a difference in this great online experience. Now, if you want, you can go back and listen to Father Roger's episode. We featured him, and he shares all about having that excellent online campus and presence. But having some quality cameras, having quality sound, and having someone to engage with makes just a world of a difference for your remote parishioners, or parishioners that maybe typically do come in person but are on vacation. Well, we've gotten through our weekend evaluation. What do we do next? Well, this is where I'm going to ask you, take a look at all of those notes you've written down from that evaluation and go back with your team and set a meeting. And this meeting should be talking all about what you found, what was good, what you can improve upon, what's a priority, and what really needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. Set some dates for these and start working on achieving these. You may want to start with some low-hanging fruit, so some of those simple fixes that we've just talked about. But by making this happen, by making this action plan and taking action on this action plan, you're going to be making an excellent weekend experience for your guests and your parishioners. If you haven't already, don't forget, you can download this weekend experience self-evaluation on our show notes or by visiting rebuiltparish.com/weekend evaluation. And if you're thinking, I might want a little bit more help with that, we can come to you and help you with a weekend observation as well. This is when our team comes to you and we share the great things we're seeing. And then we also share with you some items and help you put together an action plan to help make an excellent weekend experience in your parish. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. We're so excited and grateful that you're here. God bless you, and we'll talk to you soon.